Only women deemed worthy of bearing inbred children. The most horrifying curse ever concealed. Buried deep within the mist-shrouded valleys of West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains. A multi-generational nightmare stretching across decades, finally brought into light during the autumn of 1973. Since the mid-1800s, the Blackwood family had become a fixture in Monroe County. Their expansive property, secluded deep within isolated woodlands, sat miles removed from the nearest town of Alderson. Our inquiry begins with Margaret Blackwood, born in 1952. At 21 years old, she walked into a local doctor's office carrying an infant displaying profoundly unsettling physical traits. Now 87, Dr. Howard Reynolds recounted to us what he witnessed that afternoon. She appeared absolutely terrified. That poor girl. The child she carried possessed an oddly shaped skull, facial asymmetry, and was actively seizing. As I proceeded with routine medical history questions, Margaret grew anxious and evasive. Before abruptly fleeing, she murmured something that lingered in my thoughts for years. This is simply what happens to every child born at Blackwood Hollow. What Dr. Reynolds had no way of realizing in that moment was that he'd merely glimpsed the outermost edge of a familial horror spanning multiple generations. County records indicate that following the Great Depression, the Blackwood property grew increasingly isolated. By the 1950s, the family had nearly completely retreated from public life, surfacing only sporadically to obtain supplies. Former Sheriff Thomas Miller, who served Monroe County from 1968 until 1982, recounted what followed. After receiving that doctor's report, we launched an investigation. What we uncovered at that homestead unsettles me to this very day. 3 generations coexisting in a kind of compound, bound by rigid hierarchical codes. The most harrowing element was how the family's women were treated. Investigations revealed that Elijah Blackwood, the family patriarch, had instituted a grotesque familial structure during the isolation of the Depression years. Women within the bloodline were assigned specific functions, with particular individuals selected exclusively to reproduce with male relatives, all in service of preserving the purity of the lineage. This continued even beyond his 1962 death. His son Jeremiah upheld the same brutal customs. The psychological devastation inflicted upon these women was profound. They received no education, were confined to designated zones of the property, and were steeped in perverted religious ideologies meant to justify their subjugation. The offspring born from these unions regularly exhibited severe developmental and physiological anomalies due to the genetic consequences of consanguinity. Check your subscription status to this channel. If you're not subscribed, do it now to expose yourself to the most sinister family secrets society hopes to keep buried. Such historical examinations force us to confront uncomfortable truths regarding human nature, truths capable of reshaping your worldview. The complete scope of the Blackwood family's seclusion became evident when officials finally accessed their land in late 1973. Inside, they discovered an entirely self-contained microcosm operating under its own warped codes and caste system. The family compound comprised a central residence where Jeremiah lived alongside select male kin, plus 3 auxiliary buildings housing distinct groups of women and children sorted according to their ordained familial functions. Perhaps most chilling was the unearthing of comprehensive journals authored by both Elijah and Jeremiah Blackwood, meticulously recording their convictions about genetic purity and their methodical reproductive blueprint. Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, a geneticist who examined this case during the early 1980s, detailed the catastrophic fallout. The Blackwood case constitutes one of the starkest examples of generational genetic isolation ever documented within modern American history. Their sustained practice of interfamilial unions over successive generations precipitated a devastating accumulation of recessive genetic traits. The consequences were painfully manifest among the children born into this system. Medical records secured after authorities intervened catalogued abundant instances of developmental delays, skeletal malformations, cardiac abnormalities, and impaired immune function. Perhaps most tragically, numerous children displayed pronounced cognitive deficits, while others exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with extreme psychological injury. Sarah Jenkins, a nurse who participated in the initial medical assessments upon the family's discovery, recalled, "Examining those children is something I'll never forget. Beyond the physical abnormalities, their eyes contained something, a fusion of confusion and overwhelming grief. They possessed no awareness whatsoever of the world beyond. Certain older children would recoil at any sudden movement, suggesting prolonged mistreatment. The predicament of the women proved equally distressing. Those designated as bearers existed for reproduction alone. While they received modestly improved nutrition relative to others, they were maintained under extreme psychological control. Most had commenced childbearing in early adolescence, with some having birthed as many as 8 offspring by their mid-20s. Margaret Blackwood, whose fateful visit to Dr. Reynolds initiated the entire investigation, numbered among these women. The daughter of Jeremiah's sister, she had been ordained as a primary bearer at age 14. Her desperate attempt to procure medical assistance constituted an isolated act of defiance within a lifetime of total subjugation. County historian Walter Brooks contextualized how such profound isolation was even feasible. The Blackwoods owned almost 200 acres of heavily forested terrain. Their nearest neighbor dwelled more than 3 miles distant, and the family deliberately circulated tales concerning dangerous traps and unstable terrain to dissuade intruders. In that period, with limited communication infrastructure and a prevailing cultural inclination to honor privacy within such rural environments, a family could effectively vanish should they choose. The most heartrending dimension of the Blackwood saga emerged as the women gradually disclosed their experiences. Following relocation to a specialized care facility, 5 of the adult women eventually provided testimonies exposing the psychological manipulation sustaining the family structure. Emma Blackwood, discovered at age 32 after inhabiting the compound her entire existence, revealed the indoctrination protocols. From early childhood, they segregated us girls. Some were informed they would become kitchen women or field women. However, those of us possessing what they termed the strong Blackwood traits were groomed differently. They instructed us that our function was sacred, to perpetuate the pure bloodline. We were taught that external society was degenerate and would contaminate our lineage. The family preserved authority through isolation, religious manipulation, and punitive measures. Women challenging their assigned functions or attempting defiance were subjected to confinement within a small structure they designated the reflection room, where they languished for days with minimal sustenance until accepting their ordained purpose. Rebecca Blackwood, aged 26 and mother to 4 children, depicted the psychological conditioning. Upon reaching 13, they conducted this ceremony. The men would decree our purpose, and if you were selected as a bearer, you received a special pendant, a simple wooden disc inscribed with a carved tree. We were conditioned to feel honored by this designation, that we were conserving something invaluable. Only now do I comprehend how thoroughly perverted it all was. If you feel your heart breaking for these women who never experienced freedom, type "they deserved better" in the comments below. Your words validate their suffering and help guarantee these concealed historical atrocities remain unforgotten. The physical and emotional devastation inflicted upon these women was catastrophic. Medical assessments indicated numerous instances of nutritional deficits, untreated persistent conditions, and injuries consistent with physical abuse. The relentless pregnancies, typically initiated during adolescence and continuing without sufficient recovery intervals, caused permanent injury to their bodies. Dr. Catherine Powell, a psychiatrist who treated the women, observed, beyond the physical trauma, these women endured complex psychological injury. They were cultivated in an environment wherein their complete identity and self-worth were inextricable from reproduction. Upon removal from this framework, many experienced profound identity collapse. They possessed no framework for individual choice or personal autonomy. Perhaps most disturbing was the self-perpetuating nature of this family system. Older bearer women eventually were reassigned as guides, entrusted with instructing and conditioning younger females for their eventual functions. This generated a mechanism wherein victims became inadvertent perpetuators of the abuse cycle. Margaret Blackwood, whose bravery in pursuing external assistance ultimately precipitated the family's exposure, delivered the most comprehensive testimony. I understood something was fundamentally wrong when my 3rd child entered the world with severe abnormalities. The elder women insisted it resulted from insufficient purity in my thoughts, yet I had witnessed identical anomalies in other infants. When my sister's daughter perished at merely 4 months old exhibiting comparable symptoms, something fractured within me. I bided my time and transported my youngest infant to seek help. The Blackwood family investigation exposed a disturbing ideological apparatus refined across generations to rationalize their practices. Law enforcement discovered a leather-bound volume within Jeremiah Blackwood's quarters entitled The Preservation, enumerating the family's convictions and regulations. The doctrine appeared to have originated with Elijah Blackwood during the 1930s, merging distorted religious concepts, misunderstood genetics, and reactions to economic adversity into a corrupt philosophical system. The book contained passages asserting that the Blackwood lineage possessed exceptional qualities that would be compromised through dilution with inferior bloodlines. Historical researcher Martin Davidson explained, the timing carries significance. The Great Depression inflicted severe hardship upon rural communities like Monroe County. Numerous families forfeited farms that had remained within their bloodlines for generations. Evidence indicates Elijah Blackwood was profoundly affected by witnessing neighboring families compelled to abandon their ancestral lands. His response was to formulate an extreme manifestation of self-containment and isolation. The doctrine instituted an inflexible hierarchy within the family. At the apex were keepers, male relatives exercising exclusive decision-making authority and seldom performing manual labor. Beneath them existed various classifications of workers and, most disturbingly, the vessels, female relatives selected for reproduction based upon physical attributes and temperament. The book contained exhaustive protocols for perpetuating this system, including directives for recognizing suitable vessels among female juveniles, indoctrination methodologies, and even a calendrical framework for monitoring reproductive cycles. The clinical, dispassionate language employed to characterize human beings disclosed profound dehumanization at the family structure's foundation. Professor Elaine Richards, who examined cult behaviors within isolated communities, identified parallels with other closed collectives. What renders the Blackwood case uniquely disturbing is their construction of a comprehensive alternative reality. Unlike numerous cults organized around a magnetic leader, this represented a multi-generational system that had become self-perpetuating. Every generation was cultivated without any awareness that their reality was aberrant. Upon apprehending Jeremiah Blackwood, then 51, and 3 additional adult male relatives, authorities discovered the scope of the family's provisions for preserving isolation. The property featured substantial food stockpiles, workshops for tool maintenance, and even a modest classroom wherein children received instruction in a severely distorted rendition of history and science, deliberately designed to reinforce family doctrine. Perhaps most chilling were Jeremiah's concluding utterances upon arrest, documented by Deputy James Wilson. You imagine you're rescuing them, yet you're dismantling what required generations to perfect. The external world constitutes the genuine abomination. Our approach preserves what possesses genuine worth. When the Blackwood matter ultimately proceeded to court in 1974, it sent tremors across West Virginia and eventually commanded national attention. Jeremiah and 3 additional male relatives confronted numerous charges pertaining to their treatment of family members. Given the case's unprecedented nature and the era's constrained legal structures for addressing such circumstances, prosecutors principally depended upon allegations of unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, and various abuse statutes. The judicial proceedings were complicated by the victims' limited capacity to function within mainstream society and their profound indoctrination. Numerous individuals continued regarding their abusers as protectors and struggled to comprehend why their lifestyle was deemed objectionable. Judge William Hartford, who presided over the proceedings, subsequently recorded in his memoirs, "Across my 3 decades on the bench, no matter disturbed me more profoundly than the Blackwood family. The systematic manner in which they had annihilated the autonomy and humanity of their own kin represented a degree of calculated cruelty that haunted every participant in the proceedings." Jeremiah Blackwood received a 40-year sentence and died incarcerated in 1985, reportedly maintaining allegiance to his family doctrine until his final moment. The other men received sentences varying from 15 to 30 years. For the women and children, the aftermath introduced novel hardships. A specialized rehabilitation initiative was established at a Charleston-adjacent facility, where they obtained medical treatment, education, and psychological support. Progress proved gradual and arduous. Social worker Deborah Mitchell, who collaborated with family members for more than a decade, chronicled their journey. The younger children acclimated more readily, though numerous individuals confronted persistent health and developmental obstacles. For the adult women, particularly those designated as vessels, the transition proved extraordinarily difficult. They possessed no framework for autonomous decision-making, no education, and no exposure to normative social engagement. 5 years after their discovery, 12 of the younger Blackwood children had been positioned with adoptive families, though numerous individuals necessitated continuing specialized care. Certain adult women ultimately attained semi-independent existence within supervised environments, while others demanded lifelong assistance. Margaret Blackwood, whose courageous act had revealed the family situation, wrestled with profound guilt despite repeated reassurance that she had preserved numerous lives. She ultimately emerged as an advocate for abuse survivors and contributed to educational curricula for social workers addressing cult survivor populations. The Blackwood case catalyzed substantial modifications in how authorities approached isolated communities and potential familial maltreatment. West Virginia instituted new protocols for monitoring remote properties where children might be present, and training initiatives were developed to assist social service personnel in identifying indicators of comparable situations. The property itself, burdened by its sinister history, was ultimately forfeited to the county due to tax delinquency. Following deliberation regarding appropriate land utilization, officials determined to demolish all structures and permit the forest to reclaim the territory. Today, no trace of the Blackwood compound endures except overgrown foundations concealed beneath decades of vegetative growth. As a concluding reflection upon this troubling chapter in American history, Dr. Powell, who continued working with survivors until her 1997 retirement, offered this meditation. The Blackwood case reminds us how precarious human dignity becomes when isolation and distorted belief systems take hold. Yet, it simultaneously demonstrates the extraordinary resilience inherent in the human spirit. Certain children born into unimaginable circumstances ultimately constructed meaningful existences. That constitutes a triumph over the darkness intended to define them. If you persisted until this moment, it's because this powerful narrative resonated with you. Leave a comment indicating I watched until the end so I can better understand who genuinely values the significant historical investigations featured on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit like and share this video with others who appreciate uncovering concealed truths from our past. These overlooked narratives deserve acknowledgement regardless of how uncomfortable they render us.